The cage door slammed shut with a harsh clang, and dust swirled in the dry, blistering wind as the crowd gathered around the auction yard. The woman inside the cage knelt in the dirt, her dress torn, her skin bruised from the beating she had endured on the trail. Her lips trembled. Her eyes stared through the bars, with the faint glow of someone who had once fought to live but had almost surrendered to despair. She could still hear the laughter of the men who had dragged her here, calling her worthless, nothing but a burden nobody wanted. The auctioneer's voice rang out like a whip in the air, sharp and merciless, shouting prices for cattle, horses, and stolen goods, his words drowning in the rowdy cheers of the crowd. One by one, the buyers raised their hands for weapons, saddles, even whiskey crates. But when the auctioneer's cane struck the cage and he gestured to the woman, the crowd's energy shifted. Here she is, last one for the day, wounded, beaten, and barely worth the dirt she's kneeling on. Who'll pay for her? The words echoed, cold and humiliating, sparking cruel laughter among the men who stood around in hats and dusters, chewing tobacco and spitting into the ground. She lowered her head, clutching the torn fabric near her chest, and for a moment wished they would just walk away and leave her to rot where she sat today. The auctioneer paced in front of the cage, his boots kicking up clouds of dust, his voice mocking. No one, not even $10. She ain't pretty no more, but she's strong enough to work. His words were cut short by a silence heavier than thunder. The crowd turned as a man stepped forward from the edge of the gathering, his face shadowed beneath the brim of his wide hat. His coat was worn, his boots caked with trail dust, and his hand rested on the grip of a revolver tied low on his hip. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, looking at the woman with eyes that didn't carry the cruelty the others had. The auctioneer smirked, eager to break the silence. You interested, stranger? She ain't much, but I'll give her to you for $5. The man's voice cut through like steel drawn from a sheath. 100. The crowd gasped. Murmurs rippled through the men standing shoulder to shoulder, their laughter dying in their throats. The auctioneer blinked, his grin faltering. $100. He repeated, disbelief dripping from his tone. For her. The man stepped closer, his boots echoing against the boards of the auction stand, his hand never leaving his sidearm. You heard me. He reached into his coat and pulled out a pouch heavy with coins, letting it drop onto the wooden table in front of the auctioneer. The clinking sound silenced the last of the whispers. The woman inside the cage raised her head slowly, confusion and disbelief flickering in her eyes. She had expected to be left behind like scraps at a butcher's table, not purchased for a price greater than most men in the crowd could earn in a season. The auctioneer swallowed hard, suddenly nervous, then forced a laugh as he swept the coins into his chest pocket. Well then, boys, looks like she's sold. Auction's over. A bitter wave of disappointment moved through the crowd, but no one dared challenge the stranger. The man stepped closer to the cage and crouched down, his shadow falling over her bruised face. His voice softened, just enough for her to hear. You're coming with me. For the first time in weeks, she felt her heart pound not from fear but from the flicker of something she thought was gone, hope. The auction yard cleared slowly as the stranger unlocked the cage, the rusty hinges groaning like a dying animal, and every eye still lingered on him as though waiting to see if he would falter. The woman tried to push herself up, but her knees buckled under her weight, and she nearly collapsed back into the dirt. Without hesitation, the man bent down and caught her, his arms steady and firm, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. The crowd muttered, some spitting in disgust, others muttering curses under their breath about wasted coin. But none dared step closer. He adjusted her against his chest, the brim of his hat shadowing both their faces, and began walking toward the edge of the town. Each step echoed like defiance against the whispers, and though she could barely lift her head, she could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, where her cheek rested against his coat. She had forgotten what safety felt like, and she didn't trust it even now, yet his grip was steady, not the rough handling she had endured before. They reached his horse, a tall black stallion tied to the hitching post, its muscles rippling as it shifted impatiently in the heat. He set her down gently against the wooden rail, then turned to the stall bag, pulling out a canteen of water. Unscrewing the cap, He pressed it to her lips without a word, tilting it carefully so she wouldn't choke. She drank greedily, water spilling down her chin, and for the first time her cracked lips found relief. When she tried to speak, only a hoarse whisper came out. Why would you pay so much? His eyes lifted to meet hers, steel grey and unreadable. Because you're worth more than what they said. The words stunned her, not because of their softness, but because they carried no pity, no hesitation. He swung up into the saddle and pulled her up in front of him, securing her carefully as the stallion snorted and stamped. Then, with a sharp tug of the reins, they rode out of the town, leaving behind the stares of men who could not understand why anyone would throw away a fortune on someone they had already condemned. The trail stretched endless before them, dust rising behind the horses' hooves, and silence hung heavy between them. She watched the desert roll past, endless sand, distant mesas, a vulture circling high overhead, and felt the weight of her bruises with every movement. Yet something about the way he held the reins, one hand resting just behind her as if ready to catch her should she slip, made her wonder if fate had not finally tired of punishing her. Hours passed before they stopped at a canyon stream, the horse dipping its muzzle to drink. He lifted her down gently, his hands firm but careful, and set her on a smooth boulder by the water's edge. He knelt beside her, pulling a strip of cloth from his thul bag and dipping it in the stream, before pressing it against the dried blood on her temple. She winced, pulling back slightly, but his voice was steady, calm. You're safe now. She studied him in silence, her mistrust warring with a longing she dared not show. The scars along his jaw, the wear of long years on the trail etched into his weathered face, told her he was no stranger to violence or hardship. Yet he treated her wounds as though each mattered, as though she was not a discarded object bought at auction but a human being worth saving. Finally, she found her voice, though it trembled. What do you want from me? His hand paused, cloth still pressed to her skin, and he looked at her with eyes that did not flinch. Nothing you don't choose to give. She turned her gaze away, staring at the stream as tears she thought she no longer had began to well in her eyes. For so long she had been treated as property, a tool, a burden, yet here was a man who had paid more than she was worth, on paper only to give her the one thing no one else ever had, choice. That night, under a canopy of stars brighter than she had ever seen, they camped near the canyon. He built a small fire, its light flickering against the stone walls, and offered her a blanket while he sat a distance away, his revolver laid across his knees. He didn't touch her, didn't crowd her, simply sat watch as though guarding something precious. She curled beneath the blanket, her body aching, her heart caught between disbelief and the first fragile threads of trust. As her eyes closed, the last thought she clung to was not the pain of her wounds, but the quiet vow he had spoken, words she had never dared. Hope to hear, you're safe now. The fire had burned low when the first sound came, hooves in the distance, too many to be travelers passing through. The woman stirred awake beneath the blanket, her breath catching when she saw the man already on his feet, revolver drawn, eyes narrowed at the dark horizon. The glow of the embers lit his face in sharp lines, carved from stone and shadow. He didn't speak, just gave her a look that told her to stay low. Moments later, the riders emerged, silhouettes against the rising moon, their voices carrying across the canyon with mocking laughter. She recognized them instantly, the same men who had dragged her into that cage, who had beaten her, who had jeered when no one bid for her. Rage and fear twisted inside her, and she gripped the edge of the blanket until her knuckles turned white. Well, one of the riders called out, his voice slick with venom. Looks like the stranger here has himself a prize. $100, wasn't it? Shame to waste all that coin. The men dismounted, 6 in total, their boots crunching against the dry earth, as they spread in a half-circle around the fire. Their guns gleamed in the starlight, and their sneers cut like knives. The stranger didn't move back, didn't even raise his voice. She's not yours anymore. The leader laughed, spitting into the dirt. Not mine, not yours. Just trash. You think buying her makes her worth something? He cocked his revolver, leveling it at the man's chest. The woman's breath caught as the world seemed to freeze in that instant, the crackle of the fire the only sound. Then steel flashed. The stranger's revolver fired. Before the leader's finger even pulled back the trigger. The shot echoed through the canyon. The leader collapsing with a scream, clutching his shoulder. Chaos erupted. Gunfire, shouts, boots pounding against stone. The stranger moved like a force of nature, each shot precise, each step steady. He was outnumbered, yet his resolve was unshakable. His body shifting to shield the woman from every angle. She crouched low behind the fire, trembling, watching as dust and smoke filled the air with the acrid scent of gunpowder. 2 men fell, another staggered back clutching his chest, and the remaining riders hesitated, fear replacing their bravado. "You won her." The stranger growled, his voice cold as iron. "You'll have to pay more than I did." His revolver thundered again, sparks flying as bullets ricocheted off the canyon walls. The last of the riders turned and fled, their horses kicking up dust as they vanished into the night. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the labored breathing of the wounded leader writhing in the dirt. The stranger walked over, looming above him with the revolver still smoking in his hand. "Tell the rest of your kind," he said quietly, his tone deadly calm. "She's not for sale. Not now, not ever." The man crawled away into the shadows, his curses fading until there was nothing but the crackling of the dying fire. The stranger holstered his revolver and turned back. She was still crouched near the flames, her eyes wide, her chest heaving. When he knelt beside her, she flinched at first, but his hands were steady as he touched her shoulder. "It's over," he said, his voice softer now, stripped of the edge it had carried in battle. Tears slid down her bruised cheeks, and for a long moment she couldn't speak. Then, in a voice hoarse with exhaustion, she whispered, "Why do you protect me? Why go this far?" He held her gaze, and for the first time she saw not just steel in his eyes but sorrow, old and deep. "Because once, I couldn't protect the woman I loved. She was taken, beaten, and I was too late. I swore it wouldn't happen again. Not if I could stop it." His words struck her like a bell, resonating through the hollow places inside her. He wasn't saving her out of pity or possession. He was saving her because he carried his own scars, his own wounds that no one else could see. She reached out slowly, her trembling hand brushing against his rough knuckles. "Then maybe we save each other," she whispered. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was alive, filled with the unspoken truth that the broken could still find strength in one another. That night, under the endless blanket of stars, she slept without fear for the first time in years, her head resting near the fire, his watchful presence beside her. At dawn, when the first light painted the canyon gold, he saddled the horse again and offered his hand to her. She took it without hesitation, and together they rode into the rising sun, leaving behind the auction block, the cage, and the jeers of men who no longer had power over her. She wasn't property. She wasn't broken. She was free, and though her body carried scars, her heart carried something stronger, the belief that one man's choice to see worth, where others saw none, had given her back her life. If you felt the power of this story, of courage, redemption, and hope in the darkest places, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay with us for more gripping Wild West tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat.